I want to invite on the stage a good friend of mine, but also the founder, one of the co-founders and CEO of Multiverse X, Beniamin Mincu.
Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? How are you guys? It's really, really great to be here in Munich and have this conversation, see a lot of builders, see a lot of great energy, and explore some ideas that maybe have been happening in the ecosystem for a very, very long time. And we've not seen them. We've not seen them maybe correctly or to the scale that they deserve to be looked at. So it's really great to see you guys and see great friends and builders meet together. Today, I want to share one idea to really drive that home. And it will be probably a very simple idea, but I think it's one worth considering. And to discuss about that, to go to that, I'll basically first discuss about what is probably the most boring vertical in the world, which is real-world assets. It almost is like this, that there's this perception that the RWA vertical is mostly for old people. A lot of the people that have made the assets in this world. So there's this perception about RWA, but the question is, what actually is RWA, if you think about it? What really matters in this space? And a lot of the people maybe have a hard time thinking about the different components, the different asset classes that exist and are part of this larger vertical or narrative. And you can see them and think about them. Of course, there's currencies, there's commodities, there's real estate, carbon credits, bonds, art, intellectual property, stocks. And some of these things are really, really crazy large, significant, and big. And so the question then becomes, what makes RWA special? How do these asset classes transition from the traditional asset class to being real-world assets? And the answer to that is, you have first these assets, then they go through this tokenization process, and then they're tradable across the globe. So the simple question then becomes, why would someone go through that? Why would these assets really need or pursue the tokenization process? What are the benefits that you can essentially unlock? And some of the benefits are really significant and really large, like global liquidity, real-time settlement, accessibility, transparency, and composability. And then the question becomes, if this is so interesting, so not that boring, how large can this actually be? Why does it really matter? And you can see a very simple but clear snapshot here of the, let's say, 2 trillion that we currently have in the crypto space, the DeFi space and what it's worth, the tokenized RWA, and then all the assets in the world. And you can get the sense of what the scale is by considering that one dot equals 100 billion. So this just gives you an idea of how early this all is, but then also how large, meaningful, and significant it can become. So, of course, there's an entire vertical that's much larger that people have been looking at and building around for quite a significant time. BlackRock was mentioning that the way they look at this is that this is going to be a kind of monumental shift for the ecosystem. Why? Because when you sit on all those significant and crazy large assets, of course you'll want all these benefits for them. You want to tokenize them and get additional value out of them. So the question then becomes, what are some of the primitives that people should think about when they think about RWA? And of course, we've mentioned this and will continue to mention it. There is a need for a great hyperscalable blockchain architecture, and Multiverse X exists to service this, to offer this to the world. And the great part is that this is the most advanced blockchain architecture in the world that is live today. So that's really, really cool, and it's great to have that live and ready today. Now, a second part that's often not too much discussed about is the fact that you really need good regulation, because these assets are very large and very significant, but this also means that there's a risk that if regulation is not there, the owners of these assets will not move in time. So while Europe has generally a great challenge, just because most of the time it's this joke that if Europe and the US and maybe someone else, China, whatever, meet together, some bring innovation, someone brings technology, and then Europe just brings regulation. This is what they contribute to the game. So generally, it's not a good joke, but in this case, it's really good because MiCA just sets the ground for a lot of things to happen really fast. Because lack of regulation for these large enterprises, these large companies, means just risk. In their mind, risk is looked at very, very different than how, for instance, startups look at risk or builders look at risk. So good regulation is important, and we're now at the point where we really have in place good regulation in Europe for very large enterprises, funds, and so forth, to move in a direction that could be very, very beneficial. Now, if the US elections, of course, end up positively, then it will be very interesting, probably for the entire world, how the game will change, how fast some of the countries will change regulation, will adapt, and so forth. So quite curious and excited about that. Next, of course, you do need this process of tokenization that should be simple, that should be clear, and that should enable anyone to essentially go through the process of digitizing their assets, putting them on chain, and then being able to access them, leverage them, and get all those benefits that we were discussing about. But the one idea that I think is sort of new, and I want you to think about today, is this idea of intelligent assets. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's clear that we're going to have these tokenized assets that are globally tradable, that are liquid, that are composable. But there's one level above that that I think might be the most interesting and exciting during the next period. And this idea is that your assets should not sit locked in a bank, but rather they should be able to be intelligent. That is, meaning you can understand the context, the broader macroeconomic context, and then your asset has AI built into it, can interact with several markets, can get the best rates for whatever you're trying to do, and can do that for you, such that when you look at the asset, you don't look just at the asset. You look at the entire broader market and how your asset fits there and how it can really bring more value for you. So, of course, this idea of having hyperliquid, composable, intelligent assets, I believe will probably be a much faster acceleration for the entire world to this normally vertical that let's say is considered boring, or most of the people look at it from a very different standpoint than it actually is. So taking just one example here, imagine that you have a house and the house is worth $1 million, and you generally can never use that type of asset in more ways. You generally live in that house, experience it, but then you don't have a derivative of that assets that can be leveraged to bring you some additional yield on top. So to have the house and live in it, but then to also have this intelligent representation of the house that lives on chain, that just brings you some yield of the market, that gives you the best rates if you would want to sell the house and leverage it to buy something else, creates a very completely different game. In fact, if you think about all your assets and think about them in an intelligent or autonomous way, you can almost think as this very simple, useful metaphor or analogy of Uber that is actually leveraging all the cars that exist in the world. And I think tokenization of real-world assets will leverage all the assets that exist in the world much better. But then there's one level beyond that. When Uber has a fleet of cars like Tesla, which is the RoboCab, that you basically just buy, and then you not only have an asset that you can use, but that asset becomes productive, becomes profitable, becomes lucrative, such that while you're at work or sitting at home, that asset can bring you more value. Then things become very interesting. Now, when you consider that all your assets will be digital, will be hyperliquid, and then will be intelligent, this just means that both for the average person and for the large institutions, the amount of value that you're going to get out of your assets will be extraordinary. The same assets will now get a lot more value. Now, it also means that if you have things tokenized, you can trade your house for meme coins, for instance, and lose everything, or do some other crazy stuff that's currently happening in the space. But that's all part of the process. I think people generally narrow in on something and forget that there are many different types of people in the world. Some of them want to understand the RWA space. Some of them want to wait until their assets for simple users can be tokenized and they can leverage them. And some of them will only trade meme coins until they can buy the houses of some other people that want to tokenize them. So if I'm just taking one idea that I want to drive home, it's that the conversation is not actually around real-world assets. The conversation is about a much broader trend that's happening in the world, that's here already, and that's inevitably going to eat almost everything we're doing. And that's artificial intelligence with agents, with intelligence that's now going to be embedded in everything we're doing. We're going to see this everywhere, and having a chain that can naturally interact with this type of assets, but then also can naturally interact with this type of new technologies and tools will be extraordinarily important. This is why Multiverse X, with every step, is just going to showcase even more how well it fits because of the design that we've created and built. So this is actually not a narrative. This is just an expression of things that have been built and have been built for a very long time. And I was mentioning that if you think about assets, the most interesting type of assets are going to be the intelligent/autonomous assets. I'm going to stick probably with intelligent assets because the second you think about autonomous assets, you almost think about these assets that are going to take over the world. You want your house to do something, and then your house takes a life of its own with an AI agent, and that's a very different type of conversation, and we don't want to get into that right now. But what I'm basically saying is this: we have a settlement layer that really scales globally. That's live. That's extraordinary. We have these standards, and we have a currency of the network that really works. We have several different components that are there to enable an accelerated onboarding and bridging of different assets. Through launchpads, of course, we'll see more and more startups coming on chain and leveraging these technologies. Through exchanges, of course, we'll see liquidity being harnessed and used effectively, then lending platforms, then bridges, then stable coins. Of course, we have, you might know that in the real world asset space, the largest product market fit in the world at this point is stablecoins. And you probably know by now that Tether is the most profitable company in the world. Now, that is something very striking and very remarkable. And one thing that has been happening in the ecosystem is we've seen many interesting experiments, but one experiment in particular has been built up for years now. And the USH experiment with a native stablecoin within the ecosystem will be a very, very interesting play that I'm personally looking forward to see how it accelerates the ecosystem, how it moves us in the right direction. So most of the things are there. And this means that we are ready to interact with this new type of assets, with this new type of tools and technologies. And the most important question that I'm going to put back to you, as builders, as community, as people who think about these new iterations that you want to see exist today, is what's stopping you for building these tools, for building this type of assets, for integrating them into what you are building? I think now is the moment to take this and make it a reality. Thank you. Talk very soon.